She drives a 2017 Honda. She shops at Aldi. She just retired at 54 with $2.1 million. This is what Sylvia Bloom taught us. Sylvia Bloom died in 2016 at the age of 96. She had worked as a legal secretary at the same law firm in New York City for 67 years. 67 years at the same desk, supporting the same attorneys, handling the same files, earning a secretary's salary every year from the day she started to the day she retired. Her colleagues knew her as reliable, her family knew her as modest, her neighbors knew her as ordinary. Nobody knew she was a millionaire. When her estate was settled, her family discovered that Sylvia Bloom had accumulated approximately $9 million, not through inheritance, not through a windfall settlement, or a lottery win, or a startup that happened to exit at the right moment, through a practice she had maintained quietly, privately, without telling a single person what she was doing, for the better part of 5 decades. She had watched her bosses make investment decisions every day for 67 years. When a partner bought shares of something, Sylvia bought shares of the same thing, in smaller amounts, in her own brokerage account, from her own salary, on her lunch break. Not a complex strategy, not a dramatic one. Consistent, patient, invisible. $9 million. That is the first thing women who are quietly rich understand, and it's the thing that almost everything about how we talk about wealth gets fundamentally wrong. Wealth is not a performance. It is not a car or an address or a designer bag or a vacation posted to a story that gets 400 likes and then disappears. Wealth is a practice, a daily, recurring, almost entirely invisible practice, and the women who have built the most of it are almost universally the ones you would never guess had it. Welcome back to Financially Her. Today, we are going through what these women actually do, not in theory, not as a vague aspiration towards frugality and patience, but in the specific, concrete daily habits that accumulate into financial security most people never build. Sylvia Bloom is the proof that it is possible on an ordinary salary. What she did is replicable. Here is what it looks like in practice. Before the habits, I want to spend a few minutes on the mindset that makes all of them possible, because the mindset is not what most people assume it is. It is not a cheerful attitude towards sacrifice. It is not finding joy in spending less. It is not the specific flavor of personality that genuinely does not care about things or experiences, or the way a beautiful object makes you feel when you own it. The mindset is this: wealth is defined by optionality, not appearance, and appearance cost money that optionality would have used better. There's a well-documented psychological phenomenon researchers call conspicuous consumption, the tendency to spend money in ways that signal status to others, and the research on it is consistent across income levels, geographies, and decades of study. The people with the most, the genuine, compounding, retirement funding, life-changing kind of wealth, are almost disproportionately not displaying it, not because they're cheap, not because they deprive themselves, because they understand what the money is for. The money is not for impressing people who are not paying your bills. The money is for buying back your time, for building the specific freedom to say no to things that damage you, for creating the margin that means a job loss is a temporary disruption rather than a financial catastrophe, for funding the retirement that does not require you to keep working past the point your body says it's had enough, for giving your children options, for allowing the life-altering choices, leaving a career, starting something, moving somewhere, to be made on your terms, rather than on the terms of whoever is depositing money into your account on the 15th of the month. That is what the money is for. And once you understand it that way, the expensive car loses its appeal, not because you've trained yourself not to want it, but because you understand what it actually costs in terms of the thing you actually want. A $60,000 car is not $60,000. It's the $280,000 in compounding wealth that $60,000 invested today would produce in 20 years at 8% annual return. And suddenly, the car is not a status symbol. It's an exchange, a trade. And the question is whether you're making that trade consciously or making it by default. Sylvia Bloom never owned a luxury item. Her family found this out after she died when they were settling the estate, and they were astonished. She could have afforded almost anything in her final decades. She chose not to spend in ways that would have required withdrawing from the accounts she had spent her working life building, not because she was miserly, because she understood that the $9 million was worth more as $9 million than as anything she could have purchased it with. Here are the 5 habits of women who build quietly. Habit 1. They separate net worth from lifestyle. Quietly rich women do not buy status, they buy assets. And this distinction is not abstract. It shows up in a specific, practical rule that most of them apply without calling it a rule. Every purchase above $200 that's not a fixed household cost gets 24 hours before the decision is made. Not a week, not a complicated spreadsheet, 24 hours. The next morning, the question is, do I still want this? And more importantly, what is this money actually for? About 60% of the time, the want is still real. The other 40%, it dissolves. Not because the thing was not desirable, but because the specific energy of wanting it fades. And what remains is the clear-eyed recognition that the money has a better use. A designer handbag costs $3,000. In 5 years, it is worth perhaps $400 if it is well-maintained and you're lucky. A position in a diversified index fund bought with that same $3,000 at 8% average annual return is worth approximately $4,400 in 5 years and $13,200 in 20 years. The actual cost of the bag is not $3,000. It is $13,200 in wealth foregone over 20 years. And that is just one bag. The 24-hour rule is not deprivation. It is the pause that converts impulse into decision. Some decisions survive the pause. Many do not. The ones that do not are the ones Sylvia Bloom never made, one by one for 67 years. Habit 2. They use boredom as a strategy. The single most effective investment approach available to most people is also the most boring one. A low-cost total market index fund, automatic monthly contributions, no trading, no watching, no reacting to market news, no strategies, rotations, thematic bets, or individual stock picks. You buy the index. You add to it every month regardless of what the market is doing. You do not touch it. You let time do the compounding. Here's what Fidelity found in their internal analysis of which customer accounts performed best over long periods. The best performing accounts were ones that had been forgotten, literally, accounts where the holder had died and the estate had not yet been settled. Accounts where someone had set up automatic contributions at 25, moved abroad, and genuinely never logged in again for 20 years. Accounts that just ran unattended, with no one interfering for decades. The interference is what damages returns. The boredom is what preserves them. In practice, this habit looks like a woman who checks her investment balance once a month, records it in a note on her phone, and closes the app. She does not watch financial news. She does not have strong opinions about whether this quarter is a good time to be in equities. She has a fund, she has an automatic transfer, she has a phone note where the balance grows each month. That is the entire practice. The boredom is the discipline. The discipline is the wealth. Women, on average, trade less than men. They are more likely to set a strategy and maintain it. They are less likely to react to short-term volatility by selling, waiting, and attempting to re-enter at a better moment. This is one of the primary reasons women who invest consistently outperform men, by an average of 40 basis points per year. Not because they pick better stocks, because they do not disrupt the compounding by attempting to optimize it constantly. Habit 3. They maintain financial identity through every relationship phase. This habit is the one most financial content about wealth building entirely ignores, and it's one of the most consequential. Women who build quietly do not outsource their financial identity to a relationship. They always have accounts in their own name. Always. Not as a secret, not as a hidden reserve, but as a non-negotiable baseline of how they organize their financial lives. They always contribute to a retirement account in their own name. They always know the complete financial picture of their household, what exists, what it holds, what it's worth, and what it's allocated to. They always participate actively in financial decisions rather than delegating them entirely to a partner. They do this not because they expect relationships to end, but because they understand that financial identity is something you can't rebuild quickly once it has dissolved. The woman who has maintained her own accounts and her own credit history and her own retirement account through every phase of her life is the woman who can navigate any change that life delivers without starting from zero. The most financially secure couples the research identifies are not the ones where one person manages everything efficiently while the other trusts them to do so. They are the ones where both partners are fully informed, fully capable, and could function independently if circumstances required it. Not because they are planning for that, because they have built a partnership of two whole people, rather than a partnership of one person and one dependent. Habit 4. They play the long game on income and never wait to invest. Women who build quietly are not passive on earning. They negotiate, they ask, they position themselves for increases. They treat salary negotiation not as a special occasion that happens once in a while, but as a recurring scheduled event every 18 months or every job change, prepared with market data and a specific number and the silence after that number. But, and this matters equally, they do not wait to invest until the income reaches a threshold that feels like a real amount. They invest on the income they have in the amount they can, starting with the next paycheck after they make the decision. And then, when the income increases, they redirect at least 50% of the increase into investments before the lifestyle adjusts to the new number. This habit is called the lifestyle split rule, and it's the difference between a woman whose wealth grows in parallel with her income and a woman whose lifestyle always expands to absorb whatever she earns. The woman who earns $60,000 and invests 15% is building. The woman who earns $120,000 and spends 98% of it is not. Income is the raw material. The allocation is the variable that actually determines the outcome. Habit 5. They measure wealth in decades. The fifth habit is not a behavior, it's a relationship with time, and it's the foundation everything else rests on. Compounding returns are not linear. The first decade of consistent investing produces modest, visible growth, the kind that feels like encouragement but not like transformation. The second decade produces significantly more, the kind that begins to feel real. The third decade produces numbers that seem almost impossible to believe. Were generated by the same monthly contributions you have been making all along, and which could not have arrived any other way. Women who build quietly understand this not as a concept but as a lived reality. They do not celebrate market highs as personal victories, or mourn market drops as personal disasters. They understand that the stock market going up 40% in 2 years and then dropping 30% in 1 is noise, and the compounding happening across decades is signal. And the most important thing they can do is not confuse the two. They do not react to the noise. They let the signal run. Sylvia Bloom started this practice in the 1950s. On a secretary's salary in New York, she was not alive to see the majority of the compound growth her investments generated. But she understood, at the beginning, that the time horizon was not 5 years or 10. It was the rest of her working life. And she treated it that way, consistently, without wavering, for 67 years, $9 million. What these habits look like lived? Let me give you a specific woman to anchor these habits to. Not Sylvia Bloom, who is the aspiration, someone in her 30s, earning a normal salary, applying these habits in the normal friction of an ordinary week. Her name is Maya. She earns $68,000. She has $41,000 invested across her Roth IRA and 401k. She drives a 6-year-old car she bought used, with a single wire that occasionally needs pressing back into its socket to keep the rear window defroster working. She knows where the wire is. She is not going to spend $9,000 on a new car to fix a wire. Maya applies the 24-hour rule to every non-essential purchase above $150. Last month, she did not buy a coat she genuinely wanted, not because she could not afford it, because she waited 24 hours. And the clear-eyed morning version of herself looked at the $280 and saw $1,300 in 20 years and decided the coat she already owns is fine. She does not find this painful, she finds it efficient. The coat purchase would have taken 20 minutes to make and approximately 5 seconds of satisfaction at the checkout. The $1,300 will still be growing 20 years from now, without requiring a single subsequent decision. She checks her investment account on the last Sunday of each month. She records the balance in a note on her phone. She closes the app. She does not watch financial news. She does not know what the market did last Tuesday. She knows that her automatic transfer ran on the 1st of the month because her bank confirmed it. That is the full extent of her active involvement in her investments in a given month, 14 minutes a month. The rest of the time, the system is running without her. She has a Roth IRA in her own name, a checking account in her own name, a savings account in her own name. She is not married, but if she were, these things would be true in exactly the same way. Her financial identity is not contingent on her relationship status. It never has been. It never will be. The numbers, what this produces. A woman earning $65,000 in her early 30s applies these habits consistently. She contributes 15% of her income to retirement accounts, her 401k and Roth IRA combined. She applies the lifestyle split rule to every raise. She maintains her own accounts and credit history. She does not trade in and out of the market. She treats the timeline as 3 decades rather than 3 years. 15% of $65,000 is $9,750 per year, or approximately $812 per month. At 8% average annual return over 30 years starting from zero, that produces approximately $1.1 million at retirement from $65,000, before accounting for raises, before accounting for employer match. With a 3% average annual raise and the lifestyle split rule applied at 50% of every increase, the effective monthly contribution grows with her income. By year 30, she is contributing $1,500 to $2,000 per month rather than $812. The 30-year compound number is not $1.1 million. It's closer to $2 million from $65,000 from 5 habits applied consistently over 3 decades. Nobody would guess. She drives a used car she bought 3 years ago. She rents a clean apartment that costs less than 28% of her gross income. She makes her lunch most days. She does not own things she buys to impress other people. She is, by every external measure, a normal woman with a normal job living a normal life. And she is, by every actual financial measure, building something that will give her options most people who earn significantly more than her will never have. That is quietly rich. Not the performance of wealth, the reality of it. What if you're starting late? The objection I hear most often is, what if I'm starting late? What if I'm 38 or 42 or 47 and the number I'm starting from is much smaller than the examples above? The habits work at every starting point. They work with less runway, which means the contributions need to be higher to reach the same endpoint, but the underlying mechanics are identical. A woman who starts at 40 with $20,000 already invested and contributes $900 per month at 8% average annual return has approximately $1.1 million at 65. Not the $2 million she would have had if she started at 30, but $1.1 million, built on the same 5 habits, starting 22 years later than the optimal moment. The habits are not time-sensitive. They are income-responsive and consistency-responsive. They work whenever you start applying them. Sylvia Bloom did not have a perfect start. She worked during a period when women were routinely paid less than male colleagues for identical work. She had no financial advisor. She had no podcast telling her what to do. She had no model for what she was doing that she could point to and say, "That woman did it, I can do it too." She had a desk, a lunch break, a brokerage account, and 67 years of consistency. The consistency produced $9 million on a secretary's salary in an era when women were not supposed to be building any of this. You do not need 67 years. You do not need a perfect start or a high salary or a moment of dramatic financial clarity before you begin. You need the next payday and the one after that, and the automatic transfer that runs whether you're paying attention or not. That is the full practice. The close. Your one action from this video: set up one automatic transfer this week that you've been meaning to set up. Not a large one, not a perfect one. Not after you've researched the optimal amount or identified the ideal account. One transfer on the morning of the next payday to an investment account that runs automatically without you having to decide it every time. The first automatic transfer that runs without your active intervention is the beginning of the habit Sylvia Bloom ran for 67 years. Start there. Next video, the 2-income trap. Why married women in dual-income households are often more financially vulnerable than they appear, and the 5 protections that change this. I'll see you there.